Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation, a podcast in which we read classic books and then compare them to their cinematic retellings. I'm your host, Nicolo Grasso, and I'm joined today by my good friend and critic, Carson Timar. How are you doing, Carson? So good to have you back.
I'm so excited to be here, Nick. Thank you for having me. Certainly an interesting episode, but I'm so excited to. I'll put it this way: we didn't do this on Clappercast. There's no other person I would rather dive into the Odyssey with than you. So here we go.
I am honored. I'm really, really honored. Because, of course, this happened kind of serendipitously. We both got swept up in the hype for the Odyssey. We both felt like reading it or rereading it is something we'll get into. I'm very curious about your experience with it. And it felt like the right moment. You know, it's summer. This podcast has been on a bit of a break. There will be fewer episodes going forward just because life and work take precedence sometimes. But I'm happy to do something this spontaneously, especially with you, because, of course, today, as you mentioned, we're talking about one of the classic books, poems, epics of Western literature, The Odyssey by Homer, and of course, the latest adaptation retelling directed by Christopher Nolan.
After years of war, no one could stand between my men and home.
I am very curious what is your history with the Odyssey, because I have my own history that I want to get into in a bit, but I'm curious, was this your first time reading it? How did you even learn about it? Because this has been honestly, we have a lot to get into. I don't want to talk too much necessarily about the general reception, but I've been surprised by how many people actually did not know the story of the Odyssey going into the film. So, what is your history with Homer's epic?
So my history is basically non-existent, to be honest. I
Same.
have been my main focus of study and interest and exploration has been American literature. Maybe slightly getting into British literature now, but I've always been an American literature boy. So I've never embraced the Odyssey. But we cut to, and I'm not going to make this a big part of this conversation. You can go in the archives of this podcast, certainly. Cut to last February when we had an adaptation of Wuthering Heights come out. And everyone and their mother decided actually the number one thing we care about in life is how good of an adaptation the film is to the book. It has to be one on one. Even if the filmmaker says it's different, it's unacceptable. It's completely, we cannot even engage with the film. It is a conversation that made me mad. So before the Odyssey, because I said in February, I was like, I guarantee you no one's going to talk about this with the Odyssey. We'll get to it. And also just because I never read the story and it's a classic story. Before the Odyssey, I was like, I need to read this because I need to have the take. I need to be able to have this conversation of how this film is as an adaptation. And again, why not? It's a classic story. Went
Yeah.
online, looked at the different translations. Certainly, that is something we'll talk about where there's been quite a few different translations and adaptations of this text. Got the Robert Foggles version, and I read it in preparation for the Odyssey. But really, beyond that, I mean, I'll be honest, it's not a story. I mean, it's a story that naturally there are pieces of just existing
Mhm.
in culture you will pick up on and see references to, even if you're not aware that it's referencing the Odyssey. But as far as a direct relationship, I really had none.
Okay, fascinating, fascinating. Um, for me, it goes much further into the past, but I guess this is where we see also just cultural differences. Because of course you come from America, I'm Italian, and here it's almost unavoidable to read about the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, those three fundamental texts. Of course, the Aeneid is not by Homer. I know people, it was written centuries later. I know it's about the birth of Rome. I'm aware. But it's just part of general culture, to the point that so many terms, even just generally speaking, but so many terms from language, so many turns of phrase come from those poems. Also in Italian, they've been translated multiple times. You have also primarily the two main differences you always find is, did you read it in verse or did you read it in prose? Prose is usually much easier to read. But I remember when I was in elementary school and middle school, we would have passages from the Odyssey to read, and they were, I want to say, almost exclusively the verse versions of the Odyssey. And I've always been a Greek mythology boy. I've always been fascinated by it. I think because I was so afraid of horror cinema as a kid, there was something safer about literature and just finding those elements of horror and violence and nastiness, depravity. And Greek mythology is full of that. It's a soap opera turned up to 11 with levels of excess and of brutality that you find in all those stories. And the Odyssey, like you said, is just part of the zeitgeist, part of Western culture. The tropes, the structure, everything about it, you kind of know, even if you've not actively read the book. There are multiple different adaptations or story that take elements from the Odyssey, even in classic literature. And it is an epic that, for me, has aged very well. It's one of those things. It reminds me, because we're primarily cinephiles, occasionally you have people that look at like Citizen Kane. It's like, oh, Citizen Kane, the way it revolutionized the use of flashbacks and doing this and that with the camera and in cinema. It's impressive. And then you go and read a book written almost 3,000 years ago. And regardless of the translation that you read, it just works and it's intricate and you have so many characters, so many plot points, arcs that happen here, flashbacks within flashbacks, stories being told, non-linear storytelling. It's still impressive. How was it like for you to actually read and experience this story in first person for the
I
first time?
loved it.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I was initially a little bit worried, obviously, just because especially in my version, you're encountering maybe a form of English you don't always encounter. I think it
Mm.
helps that this year I've also been setting out to read every single Shakespeare play. So I'm
Oh,
already
nice.
kind of diving into like having to vibe through it and kind of figure out structure and organization of English that doesn't match modern English. But yeah, I mean, I love the story. I think the book is fantastic to read. I would highly recommend, especially if you're a fan of Nolan's Odyssey and you've not already, get into it. Like, it really is a great story. It's long for sure. It takes its time, but it is constantly evolving. There are times where like you just kind of have to train your mind to understand like what do you need to follow and what do you not need to follow. There's a lot of like lineage and names and these references to gods and these references to interpersonal relationships, and some of those are really important. Like whenever, in my version at least, whenever they introduce someone, they name who their mother is and who their father is. So if you get lost in the weeds of trying to track all of that, you're gonna just like fall apart. But no, I found this to be very, very captivating, very, very well read. And I think most of all, that's just so impressive is like, hot take here I know about the Odyssey. It's rather profound. Like I think we engage with storytelling and connect with storytelling, and sometimes you have this notion, especially recently, where it's like, oh, modern storytelling is somehow, well, I guess it depends who you talk to, either more profound or less profound than like historically what it's been. And I've always, focused again on like 1950s American literature. I'm like, wow, that's widely profound. But this from, way, way, way before, has so much thought and complexity and emotional pull. It really does hold up. I think for anyone who thinks that it has a stereotype in their head of like, oh, it's old, so it must be simple or it must be one note. It
Mhm.
couldn't be further from the truth. I read this, I'll admit, every single day I swim every morning at the pool. So I read this at the pool every single morning and like just immaculate vibes. Like it really was a
Amazing.
great read.
Amazing. So that's setting to experience it. I wish I'd read it at the beach. To be honest, it would have been a peak, as they say. Yeah. You mentioned the depth of characters and the wide range of characters. It is one of those elements that's very much part of epic literature. And also, I use we both use the term literature. It's we're not talking about a recently published novel that's very easy to find. Some of those were just told through time and retold and reshaped, and this is the oldest available version of the story that has been translated and retranslated hundreds of times over civilization, which is crazy to think about. But still, just for simplicity's sake, we'll keep calling it books, we'll calling it a novel. Um, but it is almost overwhelming But in a way that reminded me, funnily enough, I don't know why it came to mind, but it reminded me of experiencing Dune for the first time. Because for me, now Dune just makes sense because I've read the book, I've seen the films multiple times, I've had a podcast years ago, and for me, it's just like almost second nature to know who each character is and their Conans and this guys and that other guy. The same thing happened with the Odyssey, just because I've known about Menelaus and Antinius and Penelope and Calypso and and the Phoenicians and all those different civilizations and characters and intertwined Telemachus, and it just makes sense. But then I imagine for someone that just knows nothing about it, to reading it for the first time, yeah, you need like a flow chart or one of those maps, right? So like this is the father of that, and this connects to the other one. And I always found it funny that it's not necessarily a sequel per se, but to me it was always like, oh, it's almost one of history's first proper sequels because you've read the Iliad, but now you have the continuation of this clever character that really stepped up to the plate at the end with the Trojan horse and everything. So even the way that you have elements of the repercussion of the War of Troy, the journey back home of Odysseus and his men, and all the various adventures that they go on. Do you have any highlights about those adventures? Because that's always to me the element that I forget about the book. This was the second time reading it in full, but again, read many passages and read about it for decades, basically at this point. It always feels to me in my head that there's more about the journey back to Ithaca than the time is spent trying to retake Ithaca. But then in actuality, it's almost 50-50 the split. But do you have any particular highlights or thoughts about the first part, especially of the adventures it goes on?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that I enjoy here. I think Calypso is a great character. I also just really appreciate throughout, like, the role of the gods and the hand the gods has, whether it's his escape from Calypso, whether it's him right after with Poseidon just pissed at him, throwing him around. It's a really interesting narrative. I mean, we like because the concept of how this story uses Greek gods as characters, as influences on the world, it's something that we haven't really seen, obviously in real life, but also just in our literature, in our art, we haven't really seen much of. I mean, even something like, boy, and this is like a weird comparison, but like but obviously it's not Percy Jackson. I was gonna say, very different usage of gods and stories and narratives.
Still.
No hate, no hate, but I'm just saying very like very different levels to it all. So whatever was that influence, I mean, even just the casual conversations he has with Athena, I think there's a lot there that I certainly appreciate. I love the bit with Achilles, obviously. I mean, I think that is one of the most profound moments of the entire story.
Mhm.
I obviously the ending with the axe and the bow and such. I mean, that's a great sequence. But I do appreciate pretty much, I mean, all of it. But I think those were definitely some highlights for me.
Yeah, and I will add that for me also because we're going to be talking about Nolan's film. There's so much violence
Mm,
and in a level that like almost borders on cruelty in
mm,
some parts. That is a strong reminder of just how much we haven't really changed. I will rephrase it. We haven't really changed as a people in some ways. Elements of jealousy, hubris, guilt, pride, greed were important back then. They're still very important now. They've just changed shape. We just have more laws protecting us in a way. Um, but even more disturbing is how you have, for instance, complete dehumanization of slaves. I think like the final fate of all the servants of Odysseus's palace that helped I always forget the name in English. The Proches, the ones that the usurpers that were trying to take over the throne and marry Penelope.
the
Um,
suitors.
the suitors, yeah, the suitors, their story is the end of the servants is brutal, of with them getting hanged all with one rope. You have all of those parts where Odysseus is completely unfaithful, joyfully almost unfaithful of his wife, of spending like 1 year with Circe, captures on the island, and the men themselves have to remind him like, we have to get home. You have the wife. There's like, okay, yeah, sure, we're gonna leave now. All those elements do show how some values and some virtues have changed drastically and dramatically. But then on the other side, of course, you have all of the adventures that just really work as a standalone. I've always been very fond of Scylla and Charybdis. As a kid, especially, reading that part, which was in my anthology book, I remember, was absolutely terrifying. Because also, the movie doesn't touch on this really, but I remember when I was young and studying and reading the Odyssey, you have a lot of studies that have been made of where each part kind of takes place in the real world. And so, for instance, Scylla and Charybdis is located in um, this very small passage that is between Sicily and mainland Italy, in the south of Italy, to the point that it's always been so tight, and that's where the legend also originally comes from. It's such a small, tight passage full of rocks and stuff, especially back then, that so many ships would just destroy carrying trade or whatever, and it was easier to go that way rather than going all around Sicily. And that's where the myth comes from. It's like, oh, you cannot go there because you're gonna get, the ships are gonna get destroyed and eaten up by this water monster. Fascinating, fascinating. I love how um, everything that happens in real life is kind of translated into these myths at the time that people believed, because it was also a way of creating fears, and through stories they could invite judgment as well in some ways. And there's a lot we can talk about just those elements, but yes, so those are some of my highlights as well. How did you feel, especially I'm curious about the character of Odysseus, then, about how he's this famous trickster, to a fault. He's eaten by hubris constantly at every turn. He's doing the right thing, and then he has to prove himself to be better than everyone, and he ultimately dooms his man, but manages to retake Ithaca. How do you feel about him as a character in the story?
I mean, it's an interesting character. And I will say it obviously depends a lot on what translation you read. I know,
Mhm.
especially very famously, the most like, in my understanding, the most commonplace adaptation people would read now is Emily Wilson's, want to say 2017
Yeah,
translation of the novel,
correct.
which really takes the character and strips him of like the concepts of glory and honor, and really adapts the text to be something that Homer, to our understanding, really did not intend for it to be. As far as in the Robert Fagles version, it's a complex character because, as you mentioned, he has all these especially under a modern context. Um, Flaws of morality, flaws of hubris, flaws of action that maybe you disagree with and would put him in the opposition from your moral stances of how he should
Hmm.
behave. But at the same time, and this is like the key to the story here that's so like interesting, is number one, I mean, at times he's not favored by the gods, certainly, but when things are going well, he is favored by the gods, and certain gods do pray for his return and want his return, which creates this really like interesting moral dynamic to where it's almost like a Santa Claus character, almost, where it's like you are always being watched, you are always being judged. Um, when you are doing something that is in favor of the gods or the gods are okay with, it gives you like a moral clarity at the time, at least in the context of the story, that makes it really an interesting character to judge. And also he has, again, like, yes, he dooms his men and he has undeniably death wherever he goes, but he also has this sense of honor and this sense of not trying to do the right thing, not necessarily, but I don't think he's necessarily immediately unfair to most characters he meets, outside of those of the social dynamics at the time, as you mentioned, the servants and such, certainly. But, for example, when he first washes ashore after escaping Calypso, and he meets the woman, and he's entirely naked, and he's just begging for clothes and begging for shelter and begging for
Hmm.
direction. He does not come at that of, I'm forcing myself onto this this situation where I'm going to threaten you, or I'm going to break, the code of ethics of how you should act in this way. He's very meek and understanding and very open and very calm. So it's definitely not a villainous character. I don't feel Odysseus is a villainous character at all. He moves with a certain pride and fairness, just with those like kind of rusted edges. But I think that's what
Mhm.
makes him such a compelling character and makes this journey so compelling. But especially when you put that in context of the gods, and why do the gods not like him? When does he go against the gods? It just adds a certain level that I appreciate. So no, I enjoy his character a lot.
Yeah, and I think it also goes. I don't know if anyone has done studies about this. I'm sure someone has, but I always see it as very much a contemporary problem that protagonists have to represent societal virtues exclusively of the time to be considered good or interesting in any way. But then you look back at the entire history of civilization, and you never really get those pure characters of goodness. Even someone like Jesus Christ, of all the fictional characters, historic characters, whatever you want to call him. But even then, in the books, he's always portrayed as someone who was not perfect, who had some human flaws and managed to reach a divine level. And you see something similar in a lot of Greek mythology and ancient Greek literature, those elements of the flaws of the gods themselves have flaws. The gods, there's the whole chapter early on where they talk about the myth of Hephaestus, who's Hephaestus the cuck, you would call him nowadays, and his entire relationship with Aphrodite and Mars. The pettiness of the gods mirrors the occasional pettiness of the humans and the flaws that they have. So I think it's something that I find actually quite engaging still about going back to those old texts is how everyone kind of sucks in a way, but in a way that is human. Again, you're reading those stories. The stories are being told around campfires, in forums, to small groups of people and to large gatherings, and everyone can relate to them. Everyone is experiencing those things. So it's also one element we didn't even mention is that it's not even supposed to be a contemporary text for the time. Like the Odyssey takes place during the Age of Bronze, the Bronze Age, which is centuries before 700 BC. So there is also this element of it being an historic text, like historical fiction, speculative fiction, however you want to call it, even for the time, which is fascinating, really, really fascinating. Um, do you have anything more that you would like to talk about with the book before we transition into discussing the movie?
We're certainly going to obviously continue the discussion of the book as we
Yeah.
get into the movie. Um, I don't know if there's anything specific. I will just say, like, again, I think, and this is going to shape a lot of our conversation, I feel like, moving forward, that dynamic with the gods, and even the struggles and the fights between the gods, with this entire return of Odysseus being done behind the back of Zeus. There's a lot of dynamics there that, like, I cannot state enough if you're reading this. Even just in my version, every single time literally anything happens, a god will be brought up, and it's like, oh, by the mercy of Athena, or whatever it is.
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
this is a book defined by the god's hands, the god's presence, and that's just such a core foundation of what this story is for me. I guess I just really want to like cement that.
Totally, totally. And yeah, character we didn't mention properly, but like Athena is prevalent from beginning to end. She's a champion of Odysseus. He's a trickster. He's a clever man, and she is the goddess of wisdom. So she's very much on his side, and she helps him throughout the entire journey. She saves him at the end. It's yeah, the humanization of the gods of Olympus is central to the text. It is not central to Christopher Nolan's adaptation, retelling, however we want to call it, just freshly released, starring Matt Damon as Odysseus, Tom Holland as the son Telemachus, and Natalie as Penelope, and a slew of other actors, famous, less famous. I was excited about this film as I wouldn't necessarily call myself a fan of Christopher Nolan, but at the end of the day, I kind of am. Almost surprisingly, so I became more of a fan of him after we did an epic 6-hour conversation on Clappercast back in the olden days, 5 years ago after Tenet came out. Um, and then with the release of Oppenheimer. So I was very much looking forward to this film. And I was afraid it would not be as fantastical, maybe in a way. I do associate Nolan a lot for grounded realism, and I was not expecting the movie that I got. Positive opinion. I will get deeper into it very soon. I'm curious, Carson, what was it like for you to watch Nolan's The Odyssey?
So Nolan's an interesting figure where
Mm.
I would never argue he's a bad filmmaker. And he undeniably has like multiple 5-star films. Like Odyssey, or not Odyssey, sorry, Oppenheimer. Easy 5 stars right there, right? Like he's though a filmmaker, I would say for me, is highly inconsistent. He will make an
Mm-hmm.
amazing film and then he'll turn out something I find to be somewhat or very disappointing. I think he's someone who really nails the technical side of it often, but when it comes to story and dialogue and direction, not always. Speaking to me, he's a filmmaker I respect, but I also certainly do not have any like. He's not in my heart. He's not one of the filmmakers that I'm like, oh my god, Christopher Nolan, let's go! I can't wait. I would sell my soul to see his films. But he's someone who like I'm always interested in. So I go into each one of his films, with that said, with like very middle of the road expectations from like this could be great, but I'm not expecting greatness per se. And the Odyssey I found to be a very challenging film for me because number one, it's peace and love. It's just not the Odyssey. It's like an original film basically. It takes like general concepts maybe and general scenes from the book, but reworks pretty much everything, which we'll get into, I'm sure. But it's a film with like 5-star sequences. I really feel like he started with the set pieces and he was like, oh my gosh. And we'll
Mm.
get into the specific scenes. And he has like, oh my God, we could do these set pieces so much justice and it would be so cool. And those scenes are incredible. I mean, it's incredibly immersive. The score and sound design throughout are incredible, some of the year's best. But when it comes to building arcs and narratives and stories and finding how do we flow, especially with a 3-hour runtime because of the camera. When he admits he had a lot more that he had to cut around and chop up, which I can feel, I think it's a text that ends up being very disappointing. Again, if there was like a 40-minute version of all the set pieces, I would be there now to give it 5 stars likely. But as a film, it didn't necessarily come together. And as an adaptation, I would argue it. And we can view a film and I can appreciate a film beyond it just as an adaptation. But through the lens of an adaptation, I think it like is horrific to be honest. But I'm sure we'll get there.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Interesting, interesting. No, I'm definitely more positive when it comes to this as an adaptation. Um, but mainly kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier, actually, about Wuthering Heights. I did an episode about it with Hilary White back in February, March. It came out. Listeners can go check it out if they want. But the primary gist of it for me was that when you have something like Wuthering Heights that has been done over 30 times in feature length form plus miniseries, um, at some point the question is, why would you do it? Like, you have to do something with it in a way that makes it stand out, that makes it interesting, but for better or worse, that's what Emerald Fennell did. um and I feel kind of similarly with Nolan The Odyssey, especially considering how many adaptations we have of the Odyssey, direct adaptations. Like, I remember I watched, there's like a 1970s and 1990s TV movie type films that I saw when I was growing up. You have Oh Brother Where Art Thou that kind of modernizes it in 1920s America, 1910s, something like that. You have Theo Angelopoulos making Ulysses Gaze. You have even in literature people like James Joyce making his own Odyssey, Ulysses. So those elements, those stories have been retold and reshaped many times. So I actually like, generally speaking, I like what Nolan does with his Odyssey because of him as an author of sorts, which feels weird. I would say he's kind of very much in his own league right now, or similar to people like Paul Thomas Anderson, um, that managed to make entertaining, engaging films, blockbuster type events that people go to. But even more than PTA, to be honest, PTA was an anomaly last year. But yeah, it just makes those films that are both incredible blockbusters that make general audiences happy, but then also have a distinct authorial style, authorial voice. Um, I will be perfectly honest. I think I will get now into all the nitty gritty details of the story. Um, I want Nolan to go back to working with someone else on the screenplays because as much as I've enjoyed his movies recently, and I also loved Oppenheimer, I think Oppenheimer is maybe my favorite film of his. I would love to do like a full rewatch of his filmography in the future at some point. But there are definitely clanky moments here. I'm not gonna lie. There's some stinker dialogues. Having Tom Holland constantly call his parents mom and dad gets old after a while. Having people like John Bernthal not even try to sound different can take you out of the experience. The opening is rough here, rough editing. It's like cutting around, almost trailer style. Um, but, and this is where I also agree with what you said about the set piece structure. The moment the film slows down and can focus on those sequences and gives them time to breathe, I think it really excels. And at the core of it, you have the character of Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, who is very much a different character from the one we have in the in the book, in the original story. Um, in some ways, I would say for better. I think having the same character who's also kind of like a unfaithful womanizer, brutal towards innocent people in a way that is more explicitly um, unforgiven in the original text, I just don't think would work, especially considering Nolan's desire to make still commercial films or films for a general audience. He makes him more of a daddy father figure. Um, he smoothens out a lot of the edges of the story, but he makes him his own character that then kind of fits into the general oeuvre of his work. I'm curious how you feel about Matt Damon's Odysseus, both in terms of performance but also in terms of writing.
It's interesting. I think this is a film that, and this is gonna like hear me out on this because I don't mean what everyone's gonna assume I mean. I think the casting in this film is like very bizarre, and it was
Yeah.
one of the things. And to be clear, I don't mean like in a racist or transphobic way, which is for some reason the conversation I will not even entertain. Like, it's not a
No,
good
we're
faith
not going there.
argument. It's not a good faith argument. Everyone, no one actually who has ever made that argument is actually concerned about the quality performance or historical accuracy. Guys, don't play into the culture wars. But when I was reading the book, I was like, it's so bizarre because I know who's playing each role and it's just not giving that character. And I feel very like vindicated in that. I think that Tom Holland, not that you asked about Tom Holland, he's like horrific here. I really think he gets pushed to the edge and he does not swim. He sings. There's a movie called The King where Timothy Chalamet plays a king, and there's a scene where he's kind of pathetic throughout, and it's kind of giving, in some ways, Tom Holland in this film. But he has a scene where he has to go and he has to give this yell to his group, I
Mm.
don't know, his knights or whatever. And Timothy rises to the challenge. He gives like, in that moment, I was like, oh shit, Timothy Chalamet has some layers to him. Tom Holland has a similar scene here where he has a scene where has to go from a boy to a man and he has to rise up and yell. And I literally laughed out loud. Like, it's not good, peace and love. But Matt Damon, to the point, I also was like a little bit weird. I wouldn't necessarily envision Matt Damon as Odysseus. And I think he's fine. I think for me, his character is certainly an interesting adaptation of this character to have him really be haunted by his actions. I mean, very similar to Oppenheimer in a lot of his ways of makeup, where you have this man who has crossed a line. He's crossed the line in combat. and he has opened up kind of like Pandora's box, and he's really experiencing the weight of that. I think the writing doesn't necessarily do this perspective that I can appreciate on a concept level. I don't think the writing does a ton to really flesh that out or do a lot for it. I think one thing about Oppenheimer that works so well and really comparing the text is like he has that realization because of the death that he sees the actual response to the atomic bomb. He understands and has to live with the weight in that scene, where everything goes, where it's very loud and then everyone cuts and then he sees the dead bodies. He's dealing with the consequences of that. For Matt Damon, yes, he's haunted by the actions of Troy and the brutality of Troy, but he's also haunted by what that means for the future of combat. That's all very theoretical for him. And I also think it's very bizarre. And like, this is the thing with an adaptation that I get really frustrated with, where if you're going to change like 90% of the stuff in here, just go the extra 10% and make it work. He's haunted at Troy because he's like, we betrayed their trust. We did this really dirty thing and then we absolutely slaughtered them. And that's horrible. 10 minutes later, the conclusion of this film is he betrays the trust of people and then slaughters them horribly. It just like you're undercutting yourself there, because why? Because 3 of the suitors were brutal and mean. Why do I feel okay with you killing 100 suitors? Why is that so different than what you're doing in Troy? And the fact is that that narrative is not in the story, right? Like this is an adaptation, this is a change, but then you have to change the rest of the text to work in that way. I think it's something that's conceptually there. It also just uses a lot of like Emily Wilson's text about the Odyssey and about Odysseus. I would highly, highly, highly recommend on pensandpoison.org. Lisa Libris's article, Christopher Nolan's Odyssey has one fatal flaw. She goes in depth about Emily Wilson's translation, literally putting it line by line with multiple sequences throughout the book and showing how it strips Odysseus of his honor and his courage. And Emily Wilson, who also didn't like this movie randomly, hates Odysseus. She's like, Odysseus is a piece of shit who should never be at all looked up in at any point. And then she watched this movie and she was like, "Oh, I thought it was too woke," which was like, okay, this is such a strange
Oh
take.
God.
It was very, very weird. Because like Queen, you're the mother of this, and that's the version Nolan used.
She's her
but
own Oppenheimer.
no, literally. No,
What
and,
did
and
I
everyone's
do?
been posting that meme. I don't know if you've seen that meme. It's been everywhere on Twitter, and it's like absolutely. But I think this character doesn't quite work in the way Oppenheimer did, and I think that felt very frustrating to me because I think the core of an idea is there. Again, I just don't think Nolan can write this movie correctly.
Yeah, no, I would disagree on the like the violence at the end, mainly because I mean, they tried to kill the son, and they've been taking
Like
over the
3 of
palace and
them did
everything.
though.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
100 of them.
yeah. But
The
they're
guy in the
complicit.
back.
They're all complicit. They're all complicit. Guilty by association.
Not
It's a
everyone kicked the
fallacy.
dog.
Not everyone kicked the dog. Poor Argo. Yeah, no, but okay. Let's just to go to the end. To me, it's maybe the weakest sequence that comes right after probably the best sequence, because this is why I would love to rewatch this in a couple of weeks after some of the hype has died down and I've just let it sink. I would love to rewatch it because the moment it ended, I was like impressed technically, visually. Again, the fact that they shot it on the sea, minimal effects work for the type of movie that it is. Of course, there's a lot of CGI and practical and visual effects and everything, but it is impressively tactile. But I was not really feeling it emotionally, which surprised me considering how much I was invested in Oppenheimer 3 years ago. I was like devastated by the end of it, shaking and everything. This one I was like, yeah, I get it, but it came close in the sequence as you mentioned, when Odysseus, disguising himself as a beggar, talks with Penelope and opens up and it's like, "Oh, I'm a veteran of Troy, and this is what happened, and we broke the trust." And that's the moment where the movie really clicked for me. Before it was feeling kind of like, and that's why I kind of wish I didn't know the Odyssey going into it, and that's why I also understand the overwhelmingly positive reception of this film. because I've realized like, oh, if you don't know the Odyssey, everything is new to you. Everything is amazing and shocking and surprising. But knowing the Odyssey, I kind of hated that feeling because I knew I was going to have it, and I experienced the movie with my family. And I had, for instance, my father sometimes kind of like nudging me and it's like, yes, oh, we're getting to the scene with Circe. Oh, they're gonna be turned into pigs. Oh my god, it's horrific. They're actually being turned into pigs. Oh, the sirens. Oh, now there's the monster. Now there's 80s. Like, it's just waiting for the beats to be hidden. And it changes so much, I think, the experience. So I would love to rewatch it, just trying to enjoy it as the movie that it is. Um, that being said, that's why I actually really loved that scene of him with Penelope, because it is recontextualizing the siege of Troy and the construction of the horse in a way, like you said as well. It's kind of like the proto Oppenheimer of sorts. He's a clever man. He's a man of honor, but he created something just because he wanted all the men to go back home and he wanted the war to end, but he didn't fully take in the weight and the consequences of his actions. And then when he's faced with them, the cutaway, I think there's some very questionable casting here. Like you said, bizarre. I was thinking, why do you get Zendaya to be an Athena that says like 2 lines in the whole movie and has 5 minutes of screen time? But then the moment you get to the final scene of Troy and the flashback, and you just see that it's not actually Athena. The only goddess you see in the movie is not even a goddess; it's just a manifestation of this guilt. I thought was brilliantly done, genuinely brilliantly done. I was like, okay, this is recontextualizing everything we've seen so far. At the same time, it takes so long to get to that point, and you've seen the siege already in 2 different flashbacks, extensive flashbacks. Um, yeah, I have my problems with the film, and even in terms of adaptation, to kind of like focus it a bit more. I'm not necessarily against some of the major changes. I found it, to be honest, like, you have the less. Even in Italian, I struggle with it. Less Strigonians, the land of the giant cannibals, how you will call it in the book. And here you have them with those medieval silver swords and armors, which can kind of symbolize, the change and the end of the Bronze Era, and everything. I thought that was a sequence that honestly doesn't really work in the original story, doesn't really work in the film as well, outside of just looking cool. But then again, there's better stuff. How do you feel about some of those changes, primarily related to the first half of the story? Let's say the adventures that he goes on.
I mean, I think the actual set pieces work very well. The Cyclops is fantastic. I think Cersei, Peace and Love
Yeah.
is like the best part of the film. Samantha Morton gives, in my opinion, the best performance of the film.
Yes.
Stunning work there. I'm not going to try to get too heated about my girl Calypso getting ruined. That's the thing, is like, when I mentioned, to be clear, when I mentioned, oh, this is a horrific adaptation, I can again appreciate a film beyond it being an adaptation. I'm mostly saying that because we're here on an adaptation podcast. So I don't want
Hmm.
anyone to think like, oh, Carson just doesn't like it because it's not the Odyssey. That's not necessarily my issue with it specifically. But I don't know. Calypso was ruined, and Charlize Theron, baffling choice in my opinion. So
I don't know. I cannot
there's some bits
unsee it. I
there.
saw someone talk about it. It's like, oh, she's in a like one of those Dior commercials, things that she does.
Yes.
It's like it just feels like that.
No,
Just
exactly.
the perfect sea breeze hitting her
I like how
face.
they, knowing the character, I like how they redo the lotus flowers to where Odysseus
Yeah.
is like choosing to eat them to forget. I do think once you have the entire puzzle in front of you of Odysseus and how this character is feeling after Troy, it does feel a little bit baffling slash weird, some of the choices with his characterization in these scenes. He still struggles with hubris, he still struggles with ego. I mean, he shoots the Cyclops, he wants to hear the sirens. If that character is so haunted by what he just did in the last 10 years, it doesn't necessarily feel like that characterization is fully there for me. Um, I think the structure of this, like, I understand that a lot of the actual story is told through like flashbacks and told through retellings. It does feel like the structure here is a bit weird, where it's so much of just sitting with a character and them telling you the story, and that's when they go to a sequence. Tom Holland's arc, they set up this really strong arc, not necessarily strong in like quality, but strong in like focus of him
Mhm.
become having a boy and wanting to become a man, and then he literally disappears for 2.5 hours, like,
Can't
and just gets
complain though, to be
lost.
honest.
No, I can't complain, but like, then why set up that arc so strong? Again, it's so interesting to me, and we can talk about this with like modern filmmaking from these like auteurs,
Mhm.
especially who are pushing into IMAX, where it's like, yes, it's cool that you shot in this bigger frame that 41 theaters around the globe will get to see. To have it to be where like you have to fit your story then in this specific runtime, and you also admit like, oh, actually, I shot way more, and then we had to cut it all up and somehow make it work. I think it feels like a story that has been chopped up, and it feels like it has been weirdly organized to fit in that runtime. At the same time, though, there are so many sequences, as you mentioned, with the with the big guys. There are so many sequences here that feel like they could have been cut. I mean, once you get to like the whirlpool and stuff, it feels like we are just, going as fast as possible through some of these sequences to where I don't even really feel like their impact is felt. Um, I think it's a film that like the first hour, I got a little concerned, I guess, because like 60 or 70 minutes in, you realize like, oh, we've done like the coolest stuff and we've done like a lot of the stuff I was looking forward to. What is the rest of this going to be? I think it's one that second half really begins to start to slow down quite a bit, and not in a way that, again, I just think Oppenheimer, as far as like characterization, it clears this. I think it could have had a bigger focus on Odysseus really being haunted and going to the afterworld, and I like how they switched up what was the role of Achilles, and as I mentioned, that was one of my favorite parts of the book. I
Yeah.
think what they do here is really well. Granted, I think, some of that hauntingness of like, I would rather be a slave and alive than be what, like a king and dead or whatever.
Yeah, what was
um
the thing?
Haunting, not in the
Yeah, be
movie.
dirt to poor and alive, then rule over the dead. Yeah.
Yeah, haunting look at like honor and power, and then also considering like, I think that's one of the places where the story really switch, questions honor and power in a way that's really engaging. I also just, I mean, I have to say, and I know time wise here, where do you put this? You literally cannot go more than like 4 minutes over what this film is. Just removing the gods entirely is very weird because it's still a world undoubtedly controlled by the gods. Their presence is still felt everywhere.
Mhm.
Yet Nolan decides to rebuke the gods and question the gods. It opens with the title "A Time of Apparent Magic." The marketing of this was like "Defy the Gods," which is an entire thing here. That number one is not really done. Number two is not in the book at all. It's very just like that doesn't go anywhere. It just feels like everything you want to talk about thesis wise, whether it's Odysseus or whether it's about the gods, whether it's about honor. I mean, even Odysseus, he finally comes on his journey when he stops fighting and just lets the gods literally carry him on the ocean.
Mhm.
But he also doesn't believe in the gods. Yet then, if he does believe in the gods, then how does that affect the morality of Troy and how he feels about that? It like these are all good ideas. It just doesn't feel like any of them are like consistent through the 3 hours. I don't know if you have a one that you would point to as like, oh, for the entire 3 hours, this is the thesis that this film was presenting. But I just don't think Nolan does a great job with that.
I was thinking about it when you were talking about some of the sequences in here. Because I'm trying to think about it also in terms of a writer's perspective, like you have to adapt it. And there's some sequences that I can feel he wanted, and there's some sequences that he needed. And for instance, my beloved Shitline Charybdis, it's a sequence that he needed, he didn't want it. But you need to have it. So it's like speed runs through it, you know. Um, and there's some of those passages where it really does feel like, they're there because they have to be there. They don't, like, even in terms of editing, you cannot cut around them because each one of those scenes needs to have, he's losing the man. Even the Lestrygonians, in the original story, they have, I think it's like 11 or 12 ships, and all of those except his ship are destroyed because he was clever enough to park on the other side of the island, basically. Um, but here he only has 3 ships. But that's the thing, like, you need to have the ships, you need to have them destroyed, you need to have the men starting a mutiny. uh, I will say it's uh, rarely mentioned in conversations with the cast, but Himesh Patel as Eurylochus stand out. standout performance.
Co-lead of
Absolutely,
the film, basically. Yes.
probably more screen time than Tom Holland. I don't know. I would love. I'm not on Twitter anymore, so I don't know if the guy's still active. But the guy was doing like all the screen time things for characters. I would love to see the actual numbers of this film, like who's second place, third place. Probably like Robert Pattinson is third place or something. I don't know. Um, John Leguizamo as well. Kind of like it's fascinating how the names I was least looking forward to, or even knowing they were in the movie, actually surprised me the most. Like I was surprised by John Leguizamo's performance here. It's been a long time since I've seen him in anything that's even remotely memorable, and he really stood out. Travis Scott as the bard at the beginning and the end. Again, the friendship that he has with Nolan is fascinating to me. I thought he was canceled for some reason. He's still around. Wasn't he canceled?
I mean, his concert might have killed a bunch of people, but who hasn't at
But
this
other
point?
than that,
But I must say, I was so mad about that. Not because I was mad about Travis Scott, but Nolan hyped this up. He was like, "We are gonna like use Travis Scott because this is a story that's been told through oral retellings, and
Mhm.
we're gonna use the art of rap to like reimagine that and comment on that and reinvent the character of a bard." And I was like, that sounds incredible. Like, I love that. Every historian's gonna be mad at you, but like, I don't care. Like, let's go. And then he literally doesn't do that in a single scene. I was like, oh, okay.
Cool
Fair
opening
enough.
though.
Fair
Super
enough.
loud, super loud with him beating the staff down. Um, yeah, there's some of those sequences, but yeah, I think at the end for me, in terms of the character, it's it's always one of those things because even the role of man, you have this element, and I will actually rephrase. I'm shocked this is R rated. I wanted to touch on this actually. I am shocked this is R rated. I swear to you, I left and I was like, yeah, they swear a couple of times, but this must have been a PG-13, right? Instead, no, it's rated R, and it never feels like that. And then I'm wondering, okay, if you either maybe they accidentally got it. I doubt it. I doubt anyone like Nolan would not have cut around it just to get a PG-13. He would have done it. Um, but then why not actually go a bit deeper in some of the brutality of it all? Because
Especially
I
the
think
scene that the entire purpose is how brutal was Troy and how like this should be absolutely disgusting and horrifying and like, oh my god, we should feel sick.
I'll take the scene. I'm glad it doesn't go into like gratuitous violence. You just primarily have just like oh women are being killed. That's shorthand of like this is horrible. You needed like a small child. I mean maybe Zendaya qualifies as the small child equivalent of like no don't kill her, right as she's looking at me with puppy eyes. Um, but then it made me question some of the choices here because why not go a bit darker? And then I get it. I can feel Nolan, despite having created, Heath Ledger's Joker, Marion Cotillard in Inception can be disturbing. Like he can make very memorable villains and antagonists. Even freaking what's his face in Tenet works as a villain. Kenneth Branagh, the cartoonish Russian accent. In here, why not embrace the darkness, the R-rated nature of this, and actually have Odysseus's crew be more evil in a way, or more of its time? Because, for instance, there's a moment where they say they're like raping and pillaging villages, but you only see them show one village with one elderly man, and they're trying to be so friendly to him. It's like, why did everyone leave? We're just friendly. The moment where they go to Circe, uh, she's running away already screaming. It's almost like, oh my god, armed men, assault, scared, fear. And they're like, no, 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 we're friendly. We just want to eat. It's fine, woman. Don't be scared. But then they keep mentioning this idea of the people of the sea that are starting to take over and everyone's scared of them. This element of like immigration and fear mongering. And then you realize at the end, oh, they are the people of the sea. You could have shown it then that they were a bit worse than they actually are. I think there is this desire of Nolan to make likable characters that backfires then in those moments. So even though I found it quite moving and quite powerful, the entire scene of Troy at the end. He could have definitely done more. And we know he can do more of that because we've seen it in previous movies. So that was disappointing. And even then, it's kind of a shame that he's always been a wife guy. Nolan has always been a wife guy. He loves his wife, he loves his children. So he's already made an Odyssey before with Interstellar. Pretty much beat for beat is the same thing of having to go on the journey, then trip back home. Many years have passed. But here, the emotional resonance of it, of him going full Schwarzenegger on the on the suitors and annihilating all of them by himself. Yeah, it works. But that's also when you have the element of the gods that are just purely elemental. You cannot have, Athena creating the shield around him, that all of the spears and attacks don't hit him. It's like, oh no, this guy has just been stabbed 15 times, but he's fine and dandy, just some bandages and can piss off to go with the hobbits, you know. Um, I think this is where you see, and then I'm curious if you have more that you would like to add about this. I think the Odyssey of shows the best and the worst tendencies of Nolan. Um, and even then, I'm surprised, genuinely surprised by the overwhelming reaction. But maybe, again, it goes back to people not knowing the original story or thinking just any update is worth it. I sound more negative than I actually am. I still really enjoy, really enjoyed the film. Um, but especially for the sake of this conversation we're having, I think it's good to not be, to be fair about it. So I'm curious if you have some
My
thoughts
favorite
about this.
my favorite thing has been sizable critics, let's say, who in their tweet reaction goes, "This is probably the best one-on-one adaptation of the book that I've ever seen." Which I just think, even if you love the film, I don't know if you can really make that claim. The one thing I'll add is, I mean, you mentioned likable characters and some of the weird characterization. I found Robert Pattinson's character to be a little strange here, and I love Robert Pattinson. I think he does a great performance here. I'm a little confused about the inclusion of Corey Hawkins to the side of him, though. So much of the brutality of this character and the wickedness of this character is actually given to Corey Hawkins, which makes the conclusion of both characters kind of weird because Corey Hawkins comes off as like the far more satisfying death and actually gets his death. And then Robert Pattinson gets another death later on. I just found that to be like odd. It's not, again, like they make Robert Pattinson likable, but even in interviews, Robert Pattinson was talking about like, oh, actually, I think with this version of the character, my guy really isn't like that bad. And I kind of like tend to agree with him for the most part. It's very weird. I
Interesting.
do I do think some of the characterization of this, as you mentioned, just like I do think this needed to have a darker level, and not that it doesn't get dark. Obviously, like, Cersei is an incredibly dark scene and stuff, but especially that third time we see the Troy battle, where he's sitting with Penelope, reliving his trauma, reliving like what has foundationally changed him as a man, for it to be pretty like not soulless, but like the action there did not stand out to me as being particularly harsh. And a scene where if you took, I mean, I'm not saying you have to go all the way, but if you have a bigger evolution of the brutality of that scene to get a reaction out of the audience, I think by that point in the film, that action is not going to get this harsh, awakening of the audience to the tragedy here compared to what we've already seen.
Mhm.
I think it would have been more of a slam dunk. I mean, I don't hate this film, and I want to be like clear about that. I know, one of the reasons I reached out was like as an adaptation, I find it really interesting and again horrific. As a film, I don't necessarily find it as horrific, and I again can separate those two. The Shining is a horrific adaptation of Stephen King's book. You don't find a lot of people out here, and you won't find me saying, that's a bad film. I think this is, again, kind of as you mentioned, just like the best qualities of Nolan and the worst qualities, where it just, when it comes to arc, when it comes to narrative, when it comes to characterization, this could have been way cleaner. It could have been way more effective. I like that everyone was posting in the hype for this. Like the week of, they were posting clips of Oppenheimer. And I saw this film a little bit early and I was like, oh my God, everything in Oppenheimer clears this so much. Like it's so much better. I don't know. I always take Oppenheimer to this. And I think that this is striving to actually a lot, again, as we mentioned, a lot of the same stuff as Oppenheimer. And I just don't think it does it as well. I don't know. I would struggle to find a reason, I guess, to revisit this complete film. Again, I could revisit scenes for sure, but I think when it comes to Nolan's filmography, this unfortunately is definitely on the weaker side for me. And I think it's sad. And I do hope, just as the English teacher in me, that people do go check out the Odyssey, that people do not look at this and say, oh, this is the Odyssey, because it just isn't the Odyssey. It's Nolan's Odyssey, and that's fair, and that's fine. I have no issues with that. Yeah, I don't know. I not for me, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it will work as a Cliff Notes version, right? For people going
I mean,
forward. Like I
not
can see
like
it's like it's not like
it.
because I've seen some
It's
of the
not
other
really the
versions.
story. They change like everything about it. It's peace and love.
Yeah,
But
no,
like
no, like,
it
I
gets
mean,
the. I think for like introducing the characters, introducing some of the segments, yes. Uh, yeah, I don't know.
and I'm kind of fascinated, and I respect, like I was talking about it with my family, that for instance, some of them didn't appreciate the change to Polyphemus scene, which in the novel is entirely reliant on Odysseus using tricks and playing with the Cyclop to save his man in
Yeah.
a way. But in here, it's purely primal. It's almost a scene of horror. There's some horror elements in this film
Yeah.
that I think are really effective.
Mhm.
And also, it leads to some fun lines. I think, like, what's the line they say? It's like, why didn't he talk before? We didn't know he could talk. It says, would you talk to ants? It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's great.
cute. It's cute. And I don't see it working, like the whole idea of him. I mean, the conversation then has to have the element of there's other Cyclops around Polyphemus. They're in the
Yeah.
area, kind of roaming around, and then some of the changes that are elements that are present in the original story would create complications in the filmmaking, or just completely change the vibe of those scenes that then also would change the vibe of the movie.
Yeah.
So I also see it as just a challenge of having
Yeah.
to adapt this piece.
There's
Yeah,
certainly
sorry.
something to be said. I like in my review, I believe I compared it to actually Dune, which you mentioned, where like there's a certain level of like just the fact that this was made and is at all competent. Like when you look at the source material, especially once you read it and you see the size of this thing, the just amount of characters, the amount of plot, the wordplay, which even in a lot of translations like it gets abandoned and gets like evaporated because of the change in languages. The fact that this is on screen at all, very similar to when Denis did Dune, even though I would argue for Lynch's version, that's a conversation for another day. The fact that it's on screen at all in this format, I think has to be like applauded, right? Like this is not an easy task. I don't blame Nolan or like look at like, oh my God, Nolan, this was so simple. How did you mess this up? I would never in a million years try to adapt the Odyssey. So, I mean, good on him for that.
Yeah, this was, I think I called it in my review. I wrote something that this was kind of like a dream movie for me, because I remember being 7 years old, something like 7 or 8, reading the Odyssey, learning about the Odyssey and everything, falling in love with the adventure, and thinking, we have Lord of the Rings, why can't we have the Odyssey? And we came kind of close with Troy, which, fun fact, Nolan was actually originally supposed to direct 2004's Troy, but then dropped out and did Batman Begins for Warner Brothers. Um, but yeah, it's a small miracle that it exists, and it exists in this way where they shot on location practically. Gotta mention, speaking of on location, everything that happened with shooting in Western Sahara, the area that's occupied in Morocco, for a 4 day of shooting. Why? Like, why do that? Um, it's kind of tragic, considering some of the themes of the movie about standing up to oppressors and recognizing the violence that's made to innocent people, to then kind of perpetuate some of those things in reality. Is it worth boycotting the entire movie over? Yes and no, to be honest. Like, but then it is worth mentioning. Um, but it's still commendable wanting to make the film this practically, this compellingly. But I agree with you, and but in a way that I can kind of accept the two pieces kind of standing alone. But even then, I would love to rewatch it. And then, listeners, if you want to follow me on Letterboxd, I'm probably gonna do another review, deeper review, when I rewatch it. Um, I want to see if I will feel more emotional with it. It is something that has happened a couple of times with Nolan, to be honest, in the past. We mentioned Tenet. Um, Some of the older films, like the first time I watched them, they were just fine movies. I enjoyed them, but nothing more to it. But then revisiting them, they hit on a different level. So I'm wondering if the same will happen with the Odyssey. Maybe not. But yeah, I was left weirdly wanting more on an emotional level. I think it goes almost too much into pure entertainment blockbuster mode. Like the whole, we didn't mention it, like that's also when you get the thing of like, oh, we're not going to portray the gods, we need to have some changes in the book. Athena tells Telemachus, like, oh, the suitors are doing an ambush on you, change route and go back to Ithaca safe and scathed. Great. In here you need to have, action scene, Jason Bourne undercover in the temple, which is silly. It's just such a silly scene. They have the blood stained covers. Like, oh, come on. Uh, I think even just as a movie in itself, it's one of those scenes that feels like you need to have it just to have some action. You look at the runtime, oh, it's been 20 minutes since the last action scene. We need some violence in here. But yeah, again, worst tendencies of Nolan. Sometimes he goes into primal
Yeah. And I think it's
beliefs.
hard with like the hype and conversation around it. Like
Hmm.
it's just I don't know. I think we're at this time where like, and I don't know. We don't obviously need to get into it, but like, and I don't know if I even have like a real take on it, but like, um, this movie before it was released was being loaded, like celebrated as the best film ever made. And now on release, there's so many people going to this who are, it's the best film ever made, best film
Yeah.
of Nolan's career. It's flawless. It's a once in a lifetime cinematic adventure that has never been anything's ever touched this, which is just like obviously so um far removed from like a reality take on any film ever. um Peace and love, like even if you're at 5 stars, I'm not even saying you can't be at 5 stars on this, but like it's not that level of filmmaking.
Move
So
out
I find it
Casablanca.
no
Nolan
well,
is here.
these people have not seen Casablanca. They're like, move out of the way, one battle after another, and then move out of the way, Interstellar. That was the first best film ever made, I'm sure.
True.
It's one of those
Project
things
Hail
where I
Mary.
think, well, no, literally. Well, that actually we've seen a lot of that this week. Yeah, that's true. But I, that's
It's
funny.
another Odyssey.
Literally. I just think it's hard. Like it's a it's a frustrating conversation to try to engage with, but also then you're so immediately pushed if you have any like mixed feelings on like this extreme level where you feel like you're taking an extreme take where if you're like this is the best film ever made. And it just like I don't know, I find it really frustrating to like see the lack of debate, or because I think so many of the best films you get sharpened by debate or by discussion, where it feels like, oh, we can discuss what works, what doesn't, and then what works is seen as so much more bright and it's seen as so much more strong. Like I just think that is such a in our culture and life, we don't like things to be mixed. We want things to be an extreme right now. But I think that actually enriches things and it makes you appreciate things more. And I feel like I've had such a such a difficult time in the conversation, engaging with people to be like, oh, but this really worked on this like actual, like we're talking about it
Hmm.
level. So I appreciate that more. So it is something where it's like I like having this conversation. I'm excited to see what you think on a revisit of this. And I just wish, I guess, the conversation was not so much about these extremes, but about like really getting into the sequences, really debating stuff, really having, what did you think of Odysseus's morality? I think that is something that films like this actually suffer from right now, not having those conversations
Hmm.
between people. Um, so I don't know. I just feel like the conversation for this makes it really difficult for me to like grow my feelings on, or be challenged by, or be evolving those of.
Yeah. It's an age old adage with Nolan that he makes smart movies for dumb people, kind of thing. Peace and love. Peace and
I
love.
didn't say it.
I said it. I said it. But that's the general perception. And I do think because he made The Dark Knight and literally changed the face of contemporary blockbusters. He really did with that film. We are where we are also because of that, because of him. But then he keeps making movies that I think great, compelling, this and that. They only really end up connecting when they are really blunt and kind of idiot proof. And as much as I've lauded the last flashback to Troy, it is idiot proof. It's one of those things. Of course, there's a certain subspecies of idiots that will still not get it. But generally speaking, he's making those scenes. That's why I find it so interesting, and it makes sense that Dunkirk and Tenet, especially Tenet, are not as talked about as some of the other movies that he made in the past 15 years. Because the other movies are much more straightforward with their endings and what they're trying to say, to the point that the characters literally say it. We both love Oppenheimer, but how can people not get the ending of Oppenheimer? We destroyed the world. I fucked up. Boom, ending. It's like, great. How can you not get that? In here, you have the same thing, but then Tenet doesn't really have that. Dunkirk doesn't really have that. Dunkirk's ending is, I would say, not ambiguous, but it's having the victorious speech over images of not victory, of a defeat, of withdrawal. I think there's a lot more depth there than people usually talk about with it. But again, those films are not getting 5 stars. The Odyssey is getting the 5 stars. It is getting people going en masse. And I do think genuinely, we talked about the adaptation side of things, but to also put back the emphasis on the experience of it, it is an experience. Like, the waves are crashing, when the ship breaks and it's loud, Polyphemus scream, you feel it in your soul. The body horror of Circe, the even the brutality, honestly, of the fight at the end, I was still surprised by it. Again, it was like PG-13, we're having people's heads on axes. Kind of like rotating and doing those crazy moves. It's
Were you able to
it's
get the dialogue? I've seen online. My screening didn't have this issue, thank gosh. But I've seen so many people be like, it was too loud to where I couldn't understand the words being said. Did you have that issue at all? Or
yes, but it's a,
oh,
it's a problem
interesting.
of
Okay.
the. I saw it not IMAX regular screening, but original
Okay.
language at my multiplex here in Italy, and they have a problem with mixing. It
Okay.
was thankfully loud, but not overtly loud. I went,
Okay.
was it like 3 months ago, to watch Lee Cronin's The Mummy, and I should have left after 2 minutes because it was deafening during dialogue, and that movie gave me a headache. The Odyssey comes close, but it was still very loud. Very, very
Okay.
loud. Yeah.
Because I would say this has right now my favorite sound design of the year. I would just
Yeah.
encourage if anyone is like, I mean, and especially during the Cyclops scene, there's one scene in particular where you're like kind of in a POV shot crouching down beneath it. And I was like, this is one of the most engrossed. Like, I feel like I'm there and this is horrifying. And the sound design of that scene is incredible. I guess I would just say, like, if anyone goes and is like, oh my gosh, how do you think the sound design is amazing? The mixing was so bad I couldn't understand the voices. I think that's an issue of the Cineplex, not about the actual film itself. At least
Yes.
my screen literally did not have that issue. So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, no, I second that. It's definitely a your cinema problem. Uh, be stronger than me. I'm a slave to the movies. The moment I sit my ass down, I'm not getting up until the credits roll. But I should be the kind of person that stands up and just goes to the manager, like, "Hey, 3 decibels lower, please. Just like a tiny bit. I'm going deaf in there." Um, but I was speaking of like standout sequences as well in terms of sound design. The siren scene is one I was kind of dreading. How are they going to portray them? Is it going to be the fish ladies? Is it going to be the flying creatures? But then they find this nice balance of just having women on a shore, hidden in the mist. You don't really see them. The song that they sing is the same music of Penelope's theme, but just muted. There's some clever things about it, and again, it's making the subtext literal in that case. The song that they sing is a song um, of what your heart desires, but in the worst way possible. And what Odysseus desires is to not go home because of the shame, because of the guilt and everything, which I found to be touching, but again, blunt, but still touching. Um, that's how it is. Do you have, Carson, a favorite scene in the movie? If you had to pick just one, which would be your favorite scene?
Oh, it has to be Cersei. I mean, between the body horror, between Morton's performance, the play on that is fantastic. It's horrifying. It's funny. It like has in like a pretty short sequence. I mean, it doesn't go on for like 20 minutes or anything. It has everything you could want from a scene. I think that is easily the best. And also just, I mean, I love when this world gets, and you know, it's something in the book you get a lot of. I mean, Nolan's forced to include it, but
Mhm.
I wish there was more of it where it's just like the magicalness of this world where you don't know literally what like conceptually could be a threat on each island, so you're so hyper vigilant, whether it's a giant cyclops or this transformation from this woman who's literally pulling them into pigs. That's such a fun concept, and it's so playful in this world. And I do wish there was more of that, but I think that shines in that scene specifically.
Yeah, it's a standout. It's a true standout. In a way that I'm curious. I don't know. It feels like already everyone is pushing. Which feels weird that people are already pushing for award season this movie and everyone. But I think out of the entire cast, if she is the one that ends up um, reaching the Oscars, not in a way that I'm like, oh, I care about the Oscars, but I would just be happy to see more of Samantha Morton because I think she's always been so reliable, so good throughout her career. She never really got her flowers. So now for people to know who she is as one of the most iconic characters in literature, it reminded me that I really do need to sit my ass down and read Madeline Miller's books. You have the book on Cersei, where she retells the story from her perspective. You have Song of Achilles, I think is also hers. So there's contemporary novels about Greek myths that reshape them in ways that I've heard are actually quite strong and brilliant. So I'm looking forward to reading, probably this year, honestly, Madeline Miller's Cersei. Um, in terms of scene, for me, I've already talked about at length about the last flashback to Troy, but I also really love the visuals of when they go to the Cenarians, the land of the Cenarians. I think that's the name in English, where basically they awaken the dead and speak with them, which is one of the few scenes that's kind of untouched in terms of symbolism and everything from the book. And yeah, Elliot Page, Agamemnon. We didn't mention this. We had people complain about Elliot Page, about Lupita Nyong'o, about so many actors in this movie. I think we should have talked more about casting Benny Safdie as
Yes.
Agamemnon, to the point of willingly hiding his face because that's a face you cannot show for people to take seriously. Um, I don't know. They must have become bros, right? Is that the main reason? Like they just really love working together on
It must
Oppenheimer,
be.
because otherwise, yeah, um, it does a good job. But it was just funny, when they removed the helmet and it's just those big curls. As a curly guy, was super funny to me, just like flopping out of the helmet. But yeah, that sequence, I think they shot it in Iceland on this black beach. Um, I I'm curious how many. I love that they mentioned like you have to go and Teresias is gonna be there and it's gonna tell you what to do. And I was thinking, this guy has not been set up. Like if you don't know anything about the myth of the siege of Troy and who this character is, there's no real understanding of who this guy is, which I found kind of funny. It's one of those few moments where they don't beat you over the head with who anyone is. But yeah. Anyway, um, kind of a futile question. I know the answer, but it is my duty to ask it at the end of every conversation. Carson, at the end of the day, which version of the Odyssey do you prefer? the the original novel or the new retelling? And if you have maybe other similar adaptations, you mentioned the Coen Brothers film that you would recommend over this one.
Well, I don't like the Coen Brothers film, so let's not put that on me. I thought that
You
was
don't like it?
not for me. Like very valid. Like
Okay.
I have no hate in my heart for it. It just was not my like vibe. I didn't vibe with it.
I have not seen it
Um,
in over a decade. I think it's before even I had Letterbox. I have not seen it, so it's been a long time.
Yeah, like again, no hate. I'm not no hate in my heart for that film, but it just was not for me. I mean, I don't really have many adaptations. I sadly have not seen a lot of these adaptations. I know there's quite a few out there that I would like to check out. But just looking at Nolan's film versus the book, certainly I prefer the book. Granted, like the film could have been great in my opinion, and I still probably would prefer the book. So that's not as big of a shade on Nolan as it might come off. Fair
I'm
enough. It's the
curious,
Odyssey.
would you be open to reading the Emily Wilson? Um, of course not now, but just in general in the future, would you be open to reading it? Because I'm genuinely interested in it now after having read some of the
Yeah.
changes and things she said. Could be.
I would. I mean, I would be, and I'm also not someone who's necessarily going to like just on concept attack her work for reimagining the Odyssey. I think there is something, especially in today's age, where like no child is reading, to take an adaptation or take a translation and proclaim it to be like an accurate translation and it not be accurate in the slightest. To literally like remove lines from the text because it didn't match your version of what you were trying to say. So I judge it on that front, but like I think it's worthwhile to take a character like Odysseus and put it under modern scrutiny and look at it through a feminist perspective. That's fine. So I would definitely be open to reading it eventually. I'm aware that as an adaptation, it's not faithful, but that's also okay with me if you make it clear. It's weird that the film in February from a certain person made it clear that it was a different adaptation and no one cared then, and everyone said it was still the Demon Spawn. But I don't know who am I to say?
I love that this has become a safe place for all the directors making their own weird adaptations, from Del Toro's Frankenstein, Fennell's Wuthering Heights, and now, in a way also Nolan's Odyssey, which I do like. It's even hard for me to say I prefer the book to the film. Like, the Odyssey has been a part of my life for the past 21 years, something like that. It's been something I've been fascinated by for such a long time in Greek mythology in general. The movie just came out, and I'm not at the right age to truly adore it. I think if I had seen this 5 years ago or even longer, I would probably be one of those like 5 stars. It's amazing. It's brilliant. What it's saying, what it's doing. I can see the flaws, and I second many of the ones that you brought up here as well. It is a flawed film. It is a flawed adaptation, but I also commend it for trying to be faithful in one way and also making his own story at the same time. I do also find myself at the same point that I felt after we had our discussion on Frankenstein with Del Toro. It feels like the type of movie that Nolan's career was building towards in terms of scope, in terms of themes, especially as a direct continuation. I almost call it, I don't know if I can find a proper name for it, but I see Tenet, Oppenheimer, and Odyssey as kind of like a thematic trilogy about man made evil, trying to find unity in brotherhood and rejecting humanity's vile nature. But I don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 years. Also, because Nolan is not someone that usually makes adaptations. He usually has original ideas or just takes, in the case of Batman, takes iconic characters and makes new stories out of them. So, will he take a new book to adapt or not? And I do know that Oppenheimer was based on a biography, but it's a different. It doesn't count. That's like
I
I'm
also
always
think
afraid of the
though.
people. They're always in the comments or
Oh
waiting
yeah,
for a strong step to comment.
to call you out. I love in Oppenheimer. I mean, I think it speaks to the entire trilogy, but I especially see in Oppenheimer. I think that film, if you boil it down, really, and I know it's like idiot proof with what it's the message it's giving. If you boil it past that, I think it really is Nolan like reflecting on his place as a filmmaker between The Dark Knight and Inception, especially. I mean, those are two of the most influential films in modern
Yes.
history to where to this day almost before every film you'll still get a film that does the Inception like blah in the trailer. I think he's very aware. DGA president Christopher Nolan is very aware of how his successes has also kind of had a domino effect on some negative ways of the industry. I'm fascinated what he does next. I've seen a lot of people go, "Oh my god, please do these other myths." Don't I would not prefer that. If he does Dante's Inferno, I don't know what I will do, but I'll get nasty, unfortunately, because that is my
I
favorite.
know we are
Um,
gonna be here to talk about it. We're gonna show up on day one with our copies of Dante's Inferno. And then he has to do the sequels as well, of course. Complete the
yes.
trilogy.
I would like to see him go. I mean, I love his early I mean, we've done full podcasts, so we don't need to get into it. But like, I love Insomnia. I love The Prestige. I would like to see him
Yeah.
go back to something like that. But I know he wants to make a horror film. I'm down for that. The Cyclops scene is really cool and has some good horror in it. So I'm always going to be interested. He's one of those filmmakers. I might not like Stan. I'm never going to say he's my most anticipated film of the year. But I'll always be there. You gotta.
Same, same. We are always gonna be there for Nolan. And if he makes another adaptation, we're gonna be here in 3 years' time, 4 years' time. Let's see what he cooks up next. I'm very excited. But this is unfortunately the end of our journey of our own Odyssey through this book, shorter than the Odysseus' trip back home. Thank you so much, Carson, for joining me. Where can our listeners find you if they want to keep up with your writing and your own podcasts?
Yes, you can obviously find my writing on Clapper and Buttered Popcorn, covering the Fantasia Film Festival, as well as just random things throughout the summer. So that's fun. But my main place I would recommend you go is Clapper Podcast on Twitter, or just Clappercast in general. We're on YouTube and all your podcast platforms, reviewing older films every single week. We're in the middle of we actually have 2 series happening right now. We have our Hot Bond Summer, where myself and Jack Luke Sharp are looking at the works of James Bond all summer long. And then we're also doing our Best Picture Rewind series, where we are going through ahead of Oscars 100, various Best Picture winners. And then also we just have some random episodes with all the cast and crew you know from Anatomy of an Adaptation. Nick is on the show, Hillary's on the show, Jakob's on the show, all those great people. So go ahead and definitely check that out.
The big Clapper family. Links to all of those things are below in the show notes. You can always find me pretty much everywhere at NikiGro97, and you can follow this very podcast on Instagram at Anatomy of Adaptation Pod, where you can stay up to date with all past and future episodes. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a lovely, lovely day. We hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.